I can change that. Oh, there we go.
There you have it.
We got it. Thank you. Pardon my interruption.
No worries.
No problem. Well, with that, I'll kick it off and let Tiger get going. But for those of you that may have had the opportunity a couple of years ago to come to the State Chiefs Conference, we were able to get Tiger there, and we're able to listen to him there. Tiger's very familiar with and does a lot with recruitment and retention across the United States. He's the Vice President of Recruitment and Retention Services for First Arriving, which has a full-time marketing team. They're based out of Richmond, Virginia. And besides that, as you can see on his wall behind him, he has been in the fire service for quite some time and is, to this day, is very enthusiastic about what he does, and especially about bringing new members into our organization. So with that, Tiger, I'll let you take up as much time as you can. They don't need to listen to me.
Well, thank you, Chief, and thank you to Michael, and thank you to Kim, and thank you to the association for having me. As Chief Cowger alluded to, I did have the opportunity to spend some time out of Montana speaking at your Chiefs Conference. I've also had the good fortune, and I see he's on now, spending time with my good friend Joe Page, the chief of Whitefish, Montana, waving to everybody there. Joe and I teach for the International Association of Fire Chiefs, their recruitment and retention coordinator course. And if you haven't had the opportunity to take that yet, I certainly encourage you to do so. It's a great course, and I was actually fortunate to be part of the development team for that. As Chief Cowger said, I've been in the fire service for quite a spell, so to speak. Can't believe it. I'm actually in my 43rd year. I hold the record as the longest serving interior firefighter in the history of my fire department. I was my department's first ever junior firefighter. And if you take one look at me, do the math, carry the two, obviously I started when I was -7. That's the only logical, chronological explanation for that. But I had the privilege of serving for over 20 years as the deputy fire coordinator for the Erie County Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, which Buffalo, New York is my home. I live in Angola, right on Lake Erie, about 20 miles south of the city in what's called the Snow Belt. And there I was responsible for the training, recruitment, and operations of our county. Has 97 fire departments and over 6,000 firefighters. And I was very blessed to be in a position to actually retire from that about 5 years ago, and have served as the vice president of First Arriving ever since. And now I just simply get to help people on a much larger scale, and that's simply what I enjoy the most. I travel around the country, speaking, engaging, making presentations, keynotes, and connecting with firefighters probably about 20 to 30 times around the US and Canada every year. So I'm in a very, very privileged and blessed position to simply do what I love, and that's helping others and helping fire departments sustain and grow their ranks. That's really my passion. So again, thanks to the association. Thanks for all of you for taking your time out this evening to be a part of this conversation. So while Chief Cowger mentioned that I'm very focused on bringing in new members, largely what we're going to talk about tonight is actually retaining those new members, right? And retaining our existing members. So it's going to be talking about the slips, trips, and falls, or avoiding the perils of volunteer fire and EMS retention cliff. So I'm going to kind of take you down a path. If you know me, I like to have fun. I don't take things terribly seriously, like to kid around and so forth. So we're going to have a little tongue-in-cheek conversation about a very serious topic, though, and that is how do we recruit and how do we retain firefighters. So if you've ever been a part of any one of my conversations or presentations before, you know that I always start out with burning questions. And my first burning question for all of you tonight, and it's kind of rhetorical, but when we strip away all the roles, responsibilities, and responses that our fire departments today are dragged into, kicked into, and sometimes we simply just jump into with both feet, what business are we really in? And I'm sure you're kind of throwing out a lot of common answers would be, you know, we're in customer service, we're in public safety, we're in fire prevention, we're in firefighting, and all of those are accurate. But at the end of the day, when we strip away all those roles, responsibilities, and responses, it's my firm belief that what we're really in is the people business. And hopefully you agree with that. You think about it, every single thing that we do is both for people and with people, both for people and with people. So we're truly in the people business. But quite honestly, one of the reasons that we're in the situation that we're in the volunteer fire service with reduced staffing is because we've put pretty much all of our eggs in the for people basket and really either haven't paid attention to, or in some cases simply neglected the with people part. And it was back in 1989 that Chief Jack Snook, the chief of the Tualatin Valley, Oregon Fire Rescue Department, wrote what was long considered pretty much the Bible on volunteer recruitment, retention, and volunteer training. And quite honestly, if you have the opportunity to get your hands on a copy of it today, absent of content related to, you know, things that have happened in our world since Al Gore invented the internet, tongue in cheek, a lot of the information is still very, very relevant. And because it's very basic, right? It's how we treat people, it's how we train people, and what type of environment we're bringing them into. But in the opening pages of A Breed Apart, Chief Snook made a very bold statement. And by no means was he bashing volunteers, because he was one himself. But he said, the problem with volunteers is that they're volunteers. The problem with volunteers is that they're volunteers. Well, what do you think he meant by that? Well, the reality of that is what he was getting at, what I hypothesize, if you will, and if I was smart, I'd actually ask him, but I'm pretty sure that I know from my communications with him that absent of a paycheck to either entice people with, motivate them with, or compel them to act with, where does that motivation have to come from? It has to come from within, right? And I just want to point out, there's two photos at the bottom. It was the first time that I met Chief Snook actually in Washington, D.C. that was taken in 1992. And then the photo on the right is an opportunity I had to have my photo taken with him again. And that was in 2016 in Clearwater, Florida, at the International Fire Chiefs Symposium in the Sun. And one of the things I want to point out is from 1992 to 2016, I did not age whatsoever. So I'm pretty proud of that one. But what has changed in the fire service from 1992 to 2016 and now in 2023? Pretty much everything, right? But what shouldn't change is how we treat our people, the environment we create, and how we value our people and give them that sense of belonging. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight. So another way of positioning that, you know, what business are we in? What, you know, we're in the people business is the question that I ask in every single question or every single setting. And that is, if you're not focused on recruitment and retention, what are you focused on? Because quite honestly, absolutely nothing else matters. We can have a beautiful fire station, we can have, you know, wonderful apparatus, and we can have top of the line equipment. But all those, what I call the widgets of the fire service, are 100% useless without the proper quantity and quality of people to make them work. So I want you to go back to your fire departments, to your leadership, to your commissioners, your fire chiefs, your fire coordinators, the president, all the members of your organization, and ask the same question. If you're not focused on recruitment and retention, what are you focused on? Because the bottom line is absolutely nothing else matters. And when I first entered into the realm of volunteer recruitment and retention, which is 33 of my 43 years in the fire service, it used to be a cyclical challenge. We would put together a recruitment campaign, a public effort. We would build our ranks, we'd get big, fat, and happy. And what did we do? We ignored the relationship. We didn't maintain our ranks. And then the same problem would rear its ugly head again. We'd throw more money at it, we'd throw more energy at it, and we'd increase our ranks, and we solve the problem again. Well, the harsh reality is that it's no longer a cyclical challenge, but it's a constant challenge. And it's a challenge that needs to be addressed every single minute of every single day, because as I stated just a couple of seconds ago, absolutely nothing else matters. So if you don't know, if you read the newspapers, if you look online, wherever you get your news, it's interesting because I actually created this presentation, I think over 10 years ago, and this slide was valid then, and it's probably valid now. I was just reading an article on LinkedIn earlier today about how we still have the threat of recession holding over our head, that we're probably going to go into a deeper downturn in our economy than we've already experienced. Inflation is on the rise, and then interest rates are being risen to, try to buffer that. And in the end, who's going to be affected? It's us personally, our organizations, and certainly our volunteer fire department. So at virtually any moment, we are on the verge of a fiscal cliff. Well, it relates to a comment that I make often, and that is, just as all of us have a limited amount of disposable income, each and every one of us have a limited amount of disposable time as well. So as we think about our relationship with our volunteer fire department, I need to make sure that I'm getting the best return on my investment for the time and energy that I'm devoting to volunteering. And if I'm not getting that out of my volunteer fire department, I'm going to look elsewhere, right? And that's what's happened to a lot of volunteer fire departments, because we haven't maintained those relationships. People have lost that sense of value, they've lost that sense of belonging, and they're going to go seek it somewhere else, whether it's just increased family activities, or they're going to seek it out in another volunteering opportunity where they do feel it's the best use of their time and energy and the greatest form of return on investment. So I thought about this pending or looming fiscal cliff, and I thought, how does that relate to the fire service and the retention cliff that we are also under a threat of at all times? And then I thought about, well, how can I relate my theory of this retention cliff in a way that simple firefighters like me could even understand? So here's what I came up with. I think everybody that's watching is familiar with the relationship of the Wile E. Coyote and the roadrunner, right? What I have dubbed the Acme Fire Department. So we're going to go down a little path here. Again, a little tongue in cheek, a little wink of the eye, and have a little fun with this. But realistically, there's a lot of correlation to that relationship and the relationship that some of us have with our volunteer fire departments. So what I'm going to share with you tonight is my retention cliff theory. So where do we start? Everybody, when we came into the volunteer fire service, whether it was at 14, 16, 18, or we're what I call a late bloomer and came to it later in life, we're a lot like Wile E. Coyote, promising volunteer firefighter with a bright future. Remember that, think back to when you came into the volunteer fire service and the amount of enthusiasm and love and passion that you had for it, and hopefully you still cling to and have much of that today. Have fire, will travel, right? That's what we were about. We were waiting for the alarm bell to ring, the excitement and adventure that comes with it every time that happens, and the experiences that result from the opportunities that we have to serve in our communities. So Wile E. Coyote goes to his Acme, corner Acme volunteer fire department, and he meets somebody that looks a lot like the roadrunner, who says, "Welcome to the fire department. We make this lure, if you will, this promise of achievable expectations, despite the fact that realistically for some people, the expectations of a volunteer firefighter are simply not achievable." I don't know what it is specifically in Montana or the state that you're from, but I can tell you that a Firefighter One program in New York State, where I'm from, is 130 hours. In Pennsylvania, near us, it's 166 hours. In New Jersey, it's 230 hours. And all of those areas are experiencing, is that even achievable for somebody today? I don't care if they're jobless, they're retired, they're a student, they work part-time, whatever the case may be, or they're like most people that have a very full, robust lifestyle full of work, maybe involved in getting or furthering their education. Perhaps they have a family, maybe they have more than one job. So we really have to ask ourselves, is it truly achievable? But that's what we set out for them. And that is one of the things that we do have to demonstrate to new members or prospective members as they come to us, that it is achievable, because all we have to do is point to other people in our volunteer fire departments who have achieved it despite the very, very busy lifestyles that they have, right? I have a very heavy travel schedule. I travel almost every other week. And when I'm home, I try to make as many calls that I can. And I'm also, even despite all of that and working an awful lot, whereas what I like to say, failing miserably at retirement is my full-time job. But I still make a lot of calls, primarily because I'm around during the day and I have those opportunities. But I have to evaluate that situation, that relationship myself every day and say, are the expectations of my fire department on me? And most importantly, are the expectations of our community that they have on our fire department, is that achievable in a volunteer setting today? So those are big picture questions. But the reality is we need to make it achievable, and we need to demonstrate to prospective members exactly how they can achieve it. And most importantly, support them through that entire process. So the ultimate goal in a volunteer fire department is to get to that path to advancement. So this is how we start out the relationship. And we say things, commit yourself to the fire department and we will always look out for you, right? What's the term that we would use for that statement? Brotherhood, right? Sisterhood, firehood, family, whatever you happen to call it in your fire department setting, right? But that's really the promise that we should be, and hopefully are making to our prospective members and our new recruits, and also, just as importantly, our existing members alike. So we say, okay, welcome to the fire department. We accept you as a member. Now start climbing, right? Climb along that path. So we give them some training. Hopefully they take their firefighter 1 or whatever your first step in your training process is, right? They get some training under their belt, which hopefully builds momentum and motivation. Maybe they start taking on some responsibilities in the department, either operationally or non-operationally, right? And it's kind of an MO of the volunteer fire service. We keep throwing hats on people's racks, right? Especially as they take on responsibility. Who do we give the next job to? The person who's demonstrated they can take on responsibility. So they get some training under the belt. They're taking on some responsibility. They're getting some experience, or at least years of service, right? And we're right there behind them, pushing them up that hill, saying, turn it up, go faster, go harder, push, push, push. And then what happens? Life gets in the way. And I don't know how many of you on the line right now are instructors, but if you're actually capable of doing a presentation or a class without using a Paul Combs cartoon, my hat is off to you. It's a personal addiction of mine. Paul is a very good friend of mine. And actually, when I'm back on camera, if you can see me, you'll see over my shoulder, pretty much a Paul Combs shrine, if you will. I have several autographed pieces of his, but this is one of my favorite ones that he really just, as he does so eloquently in so many ways, just in a single image, really encapsulates the challenges that we're facing in the volunteer fire service. You look at everything that a volunteer firefighter has to juggle today, and then all of the external factors that are impacting our ability to serve as a department, as an organization, and as individuals, and it's a lot. It's a tightrope, and we're riding on a unicycle, and it's a very, very fine line, and that can get out of balance very, very quickly. And then so often we fall off of that line and we suffer the consequences of it, right? So when we get just about to the peak of that hill, the top of the mountain, and we start to slow down, or maybe our level of participation, either operationally or non-operationally, starts to either fade or it gets stagnant or it slows down or we're doing it at a different pace, does everybody immediately recognize what's going on in our lives and realize the obstacles and the challenges that we face in volunteering? Or do they more often ask us, hey, wait a second, why are you slowing down? We have high expectations for you, and suddenly you're not meeting our expectations. And sometimes those conversations go well. We explain our situation to them. Maybe we have more family obligations, work obligations. Maybe there's health issues that are preventing us, or maybe we're focusing more on our careers or our education at the time. And sometimes they're understanding, and sometimes they see that the importance of us investing in ourselves and investing in our families and investing in our careers is also an investment in our organization. But unfortunately, too often their attitude changes and they don't look like the roadrunner anymore. They look like the Tasmanian devil. And they say things like, how dare you slow down, right? We had expectations for you and you're failing miserably. And that's unfortunately, again, the nature of the beast in the volunteer fire service is so many people say either you give us 150% or you're of zero value. And unfortunately, that is not a sustainable attitude, and it's not a sustainable paradigm or an environment in our volunteer fire service. So then what are we looking at? We're looking off the edge of that cliff, and it's not a pretty picture. It's decision time, right? We have to make some choices. And we're not necessarily always involved in those decisions or those choices. Sometimes it's the department or the organization making it for us. Sometimes it's simply the external factors and other obligations that we have in our lives that are conflicting with our goal of and our want and our desire and our love of volunteering. Well, whatever the external or internal factors are, it can be a grim outlook. And sometimes we fall off that cliff even after asking for help, right? It's inevitable. We simply can't hang on any longer. And sometimes we do hang on, or we try to even inch our way back up that cliff. But then we get feedback that says things like, I always knew you would never amount to much, right? Again, it doesn't take long sometimes in our volunteer fire departments to go from hero to zero in no time flat. And again, that's an attitude shift that we need to make. And that path to advancement, those goals that we had for our volunteer fire departments, they suddenly seem unachievable. They seem unrealistic, and we struggle to hang on. And we're looking at the bottom of that cliff, just like Wile E. Coyote does every time he encounters the roadrunner. And if you remember the cartoon, not only is it us going off the end of the cliff and ending up at the bottom, but what usually follows? A very heavy anvil as well, right? To hit us in the head, pound us into the ground. And you think about it, kind of the anecdote in the volunteer fire service, that's the guilt that's put upon us when we can no longer serve at the pace at which we were serving. And sometimes that guilt is brought on by ourselves. Sometimes it's brought on by our fellow members. Sometimes it's brought on by the officers of the organization. Sometimes it's put on us by the public and their expectations. But the bottom line is, once we fall off that cliff, we have to wonder, what are our chances of coming back up the other side of that? What are the chances of regaining what we once had? And sometimes it's inevitable, and we simply go off the end of that cliff, right? And we have to say goodbye. We have to step away, if only temporarily, or it could be a permanent solution to a temporary problem. You've probably heard that phrase in other situations. It's almost as if we've written the book on mismanagement in the fire service. Think about it. How to induce a person to jump off a cliff, insist they train, take on additional responsibility, gain experience. Then as soon as their participation starts to fade, give them a good fish, give them a good push. Like I said, sometimes we slip off, sometimes we slide off, but all too often it's a swift kick in the backside that pushes us off the end of that cliff, sometimes never to return, right? Think about it, the body count, the human resources that are wasted at the bottom of that cliff are staggering. Quite often, most often, we will never realize or regain those resources and that value again. So what do we end up with? We now end up with Wile E. Coyote, disgruntled former volunteer firefighter, have audience will badmouth the fire department. And what accelerates that today? What do we literally have in the palm of your hand? And I can see some of you are looking at yours right now, right? We have technology in the palm of your hand that allows us to accelerate that bad mouthing of telling everybody who will listen within our network about the bad experience that we had with your volunteer fire department, right? They have a good experience, they might tell a couple of people. They have a bad experience, there's no limit as to how many people they're going to seek to tell.
Thanks, Dawson.
How do I mute? All right, guys, get out of the office.
Does that make sense? So, and just to be clear, I did my research, and there are actually volunteer fire departments in the United States named the Acme Fire and Rescue, Acme Hose Company, Acme Volunteer Fire Department. This is no negative reflection on them, but we're just using them for fun, right? But we think about that body count, that death toll, if you will, at the bottom of that cliff. Does that make sense? As soon as we get our training, we take on responsibility, we get some experience under our belt, but as soon as our participation starts to even just level off, maybe it fades off or it dips down a little bit, do we immediately forget every single thing that we've ever learned about fire and rescue and EMS? Is it like the scene from Men in Black where they come up with that little device that flashes a light and erases your memory? No, absolutely not. So how do we sustain that? How do we maintain that? And that's what we're going to talk about next. So I want to take you down another path here for a second and break down the demographics of the volunteer fire service the way that I see it. So let's break it down, right? So I break it down into four major categories: 14 to 18, 18 to 25, 25 to 40, and 40 plus. So 14 to 18, I refer to as the future of the fire service. And if you're not investing in your youth, you're not investing in your future. I talked about in my introduction that I am my department's first ever junior firefighter. That was 43 years ago. And one of the things that we're proudest of in my department is the fact that for the last 33 years, at least one of, and quite often all three of our fire chiefs, our chief, our first assistant, our second assistant chief, first started as either a junior firefighter or an explorer, myself included. That's an enormous testament to the value of investing in our youth. And that is, I can tell you, a tradition that we want to keep alive. We're in a position back in June of 2020 where our last explorer graduated from high school. There was nobody coming in behind him. The pandemic caused us to not be able to recruit, and our Explorer program died on the vine temporarily. Literally a year ago in March, we were able to go to the first in-person career and college fair at our high school since the pandemic started, and we came away with 8 new members of our Explorer post. And that was an awesome boost to our program. They're great young people. Many of them are just turning 18 or about to turn 18. Several of them are going to graduate from high school in June. They're going to very quickly become full members of our department, and that's going to be an immediate injection of new blood into our department and a real boost to both our recruitment efforts and our retention efforts as well. Because I'll be honest with you, one of my concerns was that when we went to the career fair, and I wasn't there, we very smartly sent, although we had nobody in that truly in that age group, we sent the people who were closest to it. And that's kind of one of my pro tips. When you go to recruit people in that future or backbone section demographic of the volunteer fire service, make sure the people you're sending are representative of that demographic, right? I used to be a card carrying member of that demographic, but my card expired several decades ago, like many of you perhaps on this call as well. So that's the future of the fire service. 18 to 25, I refer to as the backbone of the fire service because it is still a young person's job. And 40 plus, I refer to as the knowledge base or the experience base. But what do you think I refer to that age group between 25 and 40? What do you think the moniker or the label that I give that? You probably have some ideas of your own, but one of them I call the lost years, right? Think about it. What's going on in that period in a person's life from 25 to 40? Life gets in the way, right? Perhaps they're starting into a relationship. Perhaps they're getting married. Perhaps home ownership, starting a family, theoretically transitioning from maybe just a job to a career. But theoretically a time of significant personal and professional growth. Right. And if it's not the lost years, then another label that I've given it is at least the risk pool. They're at risk of life getting in the way and the volunteer fire service moving down the list of priorities in their life. You know, when they come in at 14 to 18, when they're still in high school, when they're just out of high school going into college, you know, if they're anything like me, the volunteer fire department was my life. It's where I spent every waking moment. I couldn't wait for the next call. I was there all the time. I was, you know, engaged 150%. And then just, you know, me, just like many others and many that have followed and will follow, life starts to get in the way. Our priorities change. We have to refocus and we need to figure out ways to avoid that risk pool or help them at least survive it and swim to the other side of it. So here's my bar napkin analysis of how we overlay this retention cliff theory on both the 4 core demographics of the fire service, but also if we add in years of service, AKA experience, and obviously the two are not synonymous, but that's the word I use here. Ask me if this describes your volunteer fire department. Hopefully you have a stable, still sustaining cadre of people with 15 years of experience and up. Hopefully you have at least a stable, but preferably a growing component of people with 5 years of service or less. But in the 5 to 15 years of experience range, you're real lean. And I can tell you in a personal setting and having these conversations with firefighters all over the country, that's quite often the response that I get. That's the head nod that I see. That's the look of agreement that they say, yeah, we're real lean. That's the component that we're missing. Well, think of what goes on in that 5 to 15 years of service range, right? That is when they've got some training under their belt. They're getting whatever limited experience we can give them today. And that's a real concern of mine. In just terms of experience, you know, the reality is, and maybe it's different for you, but my experience is we're going to less and less fires every day, and that's a good thing. But the bad news is we're going to less and less experience, or less and less fires every day, and that's a bad thing because we're getting less experience, right? Somebody coming into the fire service today, their first 5 years may look nothing like our first 5 years in the fire service. We got a lot of good OJT, on the job training. We got that experience. We were going to real fires. It may take them 10 or 15 years or more of service to gain the same experience that we gained in our first 5 years. So how do we compensate for that, right? But also, if you think about it, typically in the normal trajectory of a volunteer in a volunteer fire department, that 5 to 15 years of service range is the officer development phase. Perhaps we're bringing them on as a lieutenant. Maybe they're being promoted to captain. And I'll be honest with you, the chief of my department is 30 years old. He falls in that 25 to 40-year-old demographic. He falls in the 5 to 15 years of experience range. And I'm not telling tales out of church. He's in the risk pool. He's going to get married next year. He's probably going to start a family. He's rebuilding a house right now, and he's got a very busy career that is taking time away from the fire service. He's in that risk pool and hopefully can swim to the other side and it doesn't become the lost years. But this is how kind of I plot if you will, that trajectory over the years of service and also the 4 core demographics, right? So when work and life and that balance gets out of balance, something has to give. And quite often it's volunteering that suffers the most. But if we think about it, that's no fault of their own. We really can't harbor ill will towards them. It's positive attrition. But how do we figure out how to keep them as a sustaining member and still get some level of value out of them? Again, how do we prevent ourselves from simply wasting all of that value if we either let them slide off of, slip off of, or we push them off of that retention cliff, never to see them again, right? So that's what we're going to talk about. How do we build that rope bridge to the other side that allows us to hang on to and regains all the value that they bring to our organization, but also all the value that they've invested in our organization, and we've invested in them in training and time and energy as well, right? Because without that rope bridge, again, we're going to lose them. Never to get that value, never to get those contributions back again, and all will be lost and all will be wasted. So we need to build that rope bridge to continued service. And, there's a couple of ways that we can do that. It's going to be different for everybody and every department, but we need to figure out a way, right? Maybe it's a situation, okay, you can't make all the trainings. We need you to be an interior firefighter. Maybe they step back and they're an exterior firefighter. Maybe they're doing scene support operations, whatever you may title that person, or maybe they take a non-operational role while they're kind of in that risk pool. But if we can get them to the other side where maybe they're 25-30, 35-40, maybe the first kid is old enough to watch some of their younger children. Maybe their attitude has changed, and because they have a family and they want their own family protected and they want their own neighborhood protected, they have an even greater vested interest in volunteering and serving their community. Heck, maybe they get to the other side of that risk pool and they're just looking for an excuse to get out of the house. We don't really necessarily care what that motivation is, but if we don't build that rope bridge to the other side, we know what the very realistic outcomes are. Right? It's very predictable. We know what the outcomes will be if we don't build that rope bridge to the other side. So how do we sustain that, right? So the reality is, I have met the enemy, and it is us. It's our organizations and our failure to adapt to the needs and the wants and the challenges and the obstacles and the goals of our members, and instead simply insisting and expecting that they're going to adapt to the needs, the wants, and the expectations of our organization in our community. Every relationship needs to be maintained in order to be sustained, and especially to grow, to move it to the other side. So we're going to talk about some of those things and kind of how we got there. How do we get to this retention cliff theory, right? I'm sure you've seen these commercials. You probably, I see them on TV all the time. If you've been a victim of insert, problem here, you may be entitled to compensation, right? Have you been a victim of anti-retentionism in your volunteer fire department? Well, wouldn't it be great if we were entitled to compensation? But we are kind of entitled to compensation. We're entitled to the opportunity to, again, have that sense of value, have that sense of belonging, and feel like our contributions to the organization are warranted and we're getting a return on investment. So how do we avoid anti-retentionism? How do we avoid the retention cliff? How do we avoid this loss of life that we've experienced in the last 10 to 20 years in the volunteer fire service? And it starts with wiping out what I call the WMDs of the volunteer fire service. What are WMDs? Weapons of membership destruction. There's no limit as to those weapons of membership destruction. in our department. And I'm actually going to share with you kind of an outline of how you can kind of account for them, categorize them, and then prioritize them to address them in your department. I'm going to give you a tool and a resource for doing that. And I encourage you to go through that exercise with your group, with your team, with your organization, so that you can get refocused not on only on the mission of serving your community, but on making sure that you're serving the needs and wants of the people that you get to serve with. So it really derives from conflict in our organizations. Where does conflict come from? The reality is there's virtually no limit as to sources, but some of the key sources of conflict as individuals, that internal strife, which turns into organizational conflict. Think about it, it comes from our job and our want to do more volunteering than necessarily the job that we get paid for. Conflict within our family, or just conflict with the obligations that we have to stay connected to them, to serve them, to support them as we should. The conflict that we'd like to spend more time with our friends, but other things are getting in the way of that, and life changes. Certainly financial implications, and the economy is not helping that situation whatsoever right now. The fact that not only are we dealing with double income homes, whether they're with or without children and so forth, but it's triple and quadruple income homes where one or both of the parties have a full-time job and a second gig as well, right? A part-time job, just to fill in the blanks and bring in the resources that they need to sustain their livelihood and their lifestyle. But also the firehouse, as we all know, I'm sure we could share stories afterwards of opportunities for conflict in our lives that have been brought on by our life in the volunteer fire service, right? But as we break that down into more specifics, sometimes it's a value imbalance in our volunteer fire departments where our values don't align with the organization. They don't see our value, and we don't necessarily value the time and energy, or see the value in the time and energy and return on investment that we're making in the organization. It's not matched up. Does our pride for the organization match up to the pride the organization has in us? Maybe, maybe not. So that can create value imbalance or a lack of accountability. It's something I've addressed in my department where without specific job performance requirements or even job descriptions, everybody's responsible for everything, but who's accountable? And that's something that needs to be addressed. Disrespect and mistreatment. That's really the bottom line, and we're going to talk about that in a second. Burnout, stress, fear, fatigue. I won't lie to you. We were talking before the conversation started tonight with those who had come on earlier. We got winter out of the way very early in the Buffalo and Western New York area. We had a storm I think it was right after Thanksgiving, where we got several feet of snow. And just in my area alone, it was probably close to 5 feet. It was close to 7 feet in some areas here in Western New York, where I live in the snow belt. And then we were literally pounded again, where we had a blizzard that caused us to miss Christmas entirely. Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, it just had to be postponed. I had Christmas with my family about a week and a half later. It was horrible. 40 people died in that storm, most of them right in an urban environment in the city of Buffalo. It was crazy, and it was heartbreaking, but it was a very stressful time and exhausting time for our volunteers. When the perspectives and expectations of the organization don't align with the individuals, and vice versa. And certainly everybody comes with baggage, right? In our volunteer fire departments, everybody comes with a different perspective, different personalities, and a lack of communications leads to misunderstandings, hurt feelings, and further misunderstanding and conflict, right? So there's a lot of opportunity for conflict in our organizations. Let's talk about this for a second. And again, I promise I'm pretty sure this is my last Paul Combs cartoon for tonight. I actually had not only Paul, but his wife participate in my recruitment class at FDIC a couple of years ago. And I'll tell you what, you want to be nervous in front of a crowd, have somebody like that there and his wife, and especially since naturally I couldn't avoid using any of his cartoons. But does dark humor, is that a tool and a resource that we use in public safety and fire and emergency services? Absolutely. It can be a tremendously valuable tool, right? It can be a tool in helping us serve as a coping and a compensating mechanism for the things that we're exposed to that quite honestly no human being should ever have to be exposed to, but we are, right? Dark humor is the jokes that we would make, the stories that we would tell amongst us that, but quite honestly should never ever be shared in a public setting. Because one of or both of two things is going to happen. Either we're going to be locked up with a fancy jacket that ties in the back, or we're just going to be locked up, right? But dark humor is great as a coping and a compensating mechanism when applied appropriately. But my concern is when dark humor becomes the norm instead of the exception, it could become problematic and cancerous in our organizations, in our dealings with each other and the way that we treat each other, right? And think about the setting when somebody is away from your department, they don't show up on a call, they don't show up at a training, we haven't seen them for a meeting in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days or longer. And the first time they come back for either a social setting or to answer a call or for a training, you know, do we run up to them? Do we throw our arms around them, welcome them back to the fold? Excuse me. Or what's a more likely response? Hi, who are you? Would you like a tour? Can I get you an application? Right? Do you need directions? And those are the polite responses, right? I'm sure we could tell tales over an adult beverage of much more realistic responses that we may give to those people. But what's the problem with the root of that conversation when you think about it and you break it down? First and foremost, the fact that we have no clue as to what was keeping them away from the fire department for 30 days, 60 days or longer says shame on us, right? What's the root of brotherhood, sisterhood, firehood? It says we care about you. But if we don't care enough to even reach out to you and find out what was keeping you away, for all we know, it could have been a job situation, it could have been a family situation, it could have been a health situation, or it could have been a mental health situation where they had a bad experience, either on an incident scene or even in the firehouse that caused them to stay away for whatever period of time. They were a victim. It's quite possible that they were a victim of anti-retentionism, right? That's a problem in our firehouses. But if we don't know enough to reach out and we don't know what that situation was and we don't care, and then when they do come back, we just continue the abuse, there's a real good chance they're going to turn around, walk out the door, never to be seen again. So dark humor, while it can be both a tool and a toy, we have to make sure that it's also not used as a weapon of membership destruction as well. This next slide that you're seeing here, you will never see in a textbook. You'll never see it in any official program, anything of that nature. It's kind of my own personal definition of what does harassment look like. And it really comes down to intention, frequency, and kind of what class we put it in, right? If somebody said something that was truly hurtful to you, whether everybody else perceived it that way or you just perceive it that way, or it could be a situation of something that was said to somebody else that you perceive it as being hurtful, the way that we were treated, the way that they were treated, you know, if it was unintentional and it happened once, it's just rude and it should be addressed. But if it was intentional and it was just went once, it's downright mean and it definitely needs to be addressed. But if it was intentional and it's done repeatedly, that's where we've crossed the line. That's where dark humor is no longer appropriate. And that's where it becomes a weapon of membership destruction. And it's true harassment and it needs to be addressed at every level in the organization. It cannot be tolerated. and it needs to be addressed effectively, and it needs to be addressed swiftly as well. Because if you don't address it, what's going to happen? It's going to fester, it's going to get worse. Other people are going to see that, well, if they can be treated that way, then I should expect to be treated that way as well. And I don't care to be treated that way. And we need to move away from that. So the next, the realities of that is, what are the real world implications that firehouse conflict has, right? It could result in simply a grievance where somebody brings it up and it has to be addressed at the leadership level. It could result in a lawsuit, and that doesn't help anybody. We could lose them for a period of time because they're upset. They step away from the fire department, and we lose the value of their time and their contributions. It could be the other way around, where they're the ones that don't have the right attitude, or they're the perpetrator of harassment. And we have no choice but to offer them either some time off or a more permanent situation where we offer them the opportunity to seek alternate volunteering opportunities, AKA fire a volunteer, or real world implication that a member is lost. We know that post-traumatic stress isn't just related to the incidents that we're exposed to outside of the firehouse, but it can be to the way we're treated inside the firehouse. We also know that the suicide rate amongst firefighters and other first responders is much higher than it ever should be. And it's a harsh reality of today's world, and especially life and public safety and emergency services. And maybe you're in a department that has suffered loss in that way, and I feel terrible for you, because it can have long-lasting and very deep negative impacts on the overall operation and your ability to deliver services to your community, but also your ability to serve the people that you serve with. And that's a real challenge to recover from. And I certainly hope that if you have experienced that in whatever form, as depicted on this slide, that you're doing something about it, you're addressing it, and where appropriate, you're seeking outside resources and outside help for that. So I encourage you to go through this exercise. I call it my Recruitment Retention Assessment Center. Again, you can do it on a flip chart, or what is called an oversized sticky note today. But it's my DJJS DS exercise, the reasons, and evaluate for your own department, why don't people join your fire department? Don't look at just the societal and big picture things, but specifically localize it. Why do you think people aren't joining your fire department, right? Make it hyper local. Work from the outside in, look at the reasons people don't join. Most importantly, why aren't they staying? Is it positive attrition or negative attrition? You can't do everything about every situation. If there are no jobs in your area and you're losing people because they have to take jobs outside the area, can you have an impact on that? Probably not. That's more societal. Can you have an impact on the economy? Probably not. Can you have an impact on, excuse me, whether or not there's affordable housing in your area? Probably not. Those are big picture things that you can't necessarily have a direct or immediate impact on. But look for the low-hanging fruit and look at real reasons why people aren't joining and why they're not staying, and start with those and start addressing them today, right? But work from the outside in. Most importantly, look at the reasons people do join and also ask them why they are staying. There's a big emphasis today on having exit interviews for people that leave your organization. A more appropriate, and quite honestly, a more proactive approach to that is to have what are called stay conversations. My good friend Spencer Cheatham promotes this often, that instead of waiting until it's too late and you have to have an exit interview with them, most importantly, take the time to have a stay conversation. Listen, let's take your temperature. Where are we at? Where are you at with the organization? Where is the organization at with you? And what is it going to take for you to stay? How long do you anticipate continuing to be a member of our organization? What can we do to make the environment, the culture, and your volunteering opportunities better, more enjoyable, and more sustainable? And what can we do to make your life easier that will allow you to be more actively engaged, respond more often, or something that I'm very focused on, what can we do to make your family's life easier, your support system better, which is going to make your ability to continue to volunteer easier on you and easier on them and everybody else involved. So if you're interested, I will send you this kind of cheat sheet and step you through this exercise. It's an exercise I do in all of my in-person classes and with all the departments that I have the opportunity to go in and do strategy visits with as well. But certainly I encourage you to go through that process, go through that exercise in your own department, and most importantly, be focused on making changes, be focused on the outcomes, and be focused on making that change together. So how do we build that rope bridge to the other side? How do we prevent or avoid that retention cliff? How do we address conflict? Well, it comes down to the 3 C's, right? We've heard these before. These are used. These are the foundation of the incident command system. It really comes down to these 3 C's. Effective communications, whether it's on the fire ground or an incident that happens in our firehouse. Most often, if you were to do an AAR, a hot wash, whatever you call it, the number 1 answer on the board as to what failed is going to be communications, right? After that, it takes a coordinated effort. We need somebody looking at the health of our organization, the mental well-being and enjoyment level and satisfaction levels of our members as individuals, looking at, are we meeting the needs and wants and goals and opportunities that our volunteers are looking for? But it also, we need that feedback from the bottom up. I just wrote fairly recently an article, and again, at the end, I'm going to have my contact information if you reach out to me. It's an article that I did about kind of doing a litmus test and doing member satisfaction surveys in your department, if that's something that you're interested in, to, again, gather that feedback that you can't necessarily just gather by walking around and talking and having individual state conversations with your members. But the bottom line, it takes cooperation, right? It takes cooperation from the bottom of the organization through the top of the organization, everybody else in between, cooperation with the people that our organization answers to, the people we serve with, and most importantly, the people who allow us to serve as well. That's the only way that we're going to be able to achieve community in our organizations. It really comes back to those 3 C's. But the foundation of all of that is what I call establishing a baseline for human relations in our organizations. And it's as simple as this. I promise to treat my fellow members at least with the same level of respect that I would give to a stranger meeting them on the street for the first time. But do we sometimes cross that baseline? Do we sometimes abuse that? Do we sometimes not treat our own fellow members, the people we call our sisters, our brothers, our second family, as well as we would treat a stranger meeting them on the street for the very first time? Absolutely. And probably every single day. And a lot of it revolves around that dark humor that we talked about earlier, right? And that's okay when it's done in fun, but when it stops being fun, it becomes a weapon of membership destruction. And think about it. If we actually walked up to a stranger, meeting them on the street for the very first time and talked to them or treated them the way that we treat each other in the firehouse, what are probably the most logical outcomes of that interaction? Probably either jail time or a funeral, and the funeral is going to be ours, right? They're not going to like it, they're not going to take it, and we're going to feel the pain associated with that. But that's really what it comes down to, is establishing that baseline for human relations. What is the line in the sand? What is that fire line that we will not cross? Or when somebody steps over it, we reel them back and we say, listen, we need to hit the reset button, or somebody either needs a boot or a reboot to get their attitude straight and get it back in line, right? So a great way to do all of that I'm very big on, is integrating the family right from the start. I know of departments working with them across the country that actually invite the family into a second interview if the person, the candidate for membership, makes it to that point. Because I don't know about you, but when I raised my right hand, I wasn't the only one swearing that oath to serve, right? It was everybody who stands behind me. Lori, my wife, my Kathleen, my daughter, and Alex, my son, and now my extended family with that. Because they're the ones making the real sacrifices. They're the ones who make it possible for me to do what I do, serve my community, and make the contributions that I do to the organization. So I'm a firm believer on peace at home equals peace at the firehouse. You know, and it's funny, a lot of people ask me, what's a good incentive for volunteers? And kind of my tort response has always been, what are you asking me for? Ask your volunteers. What is a good incentive? What would make or break their ability to serve more often, contribute more, or simply continue to serve? And most importantly, make sure you're targeting the right audience with your incentive programs. I don't need another t-shirt. I don't need another hat. I don't need another sweatshirt. And by the way, if any of you have spares, I wear a size large in all of those. Thank you very much. I'll send you my address. But make sure that we're targeting the right audience with our incentive programs. You want to do something for the volunteer, do something for their family. Most importantly, give them a gift that causes them, literally forces them to spend more time with their family, who they've probably been starving for attention for far too long. So peace at home equals peace at the firehouse is one of my 10 commandments for recruitment and retention. It's a document that I wrote literally 22 years ago, and also is going to be something that will be in the email that we follow up with, and or you can reach out to me for. I had the opportunity to sit on a panel discussion back in 2014 for the National Volunteer Fire Council for their spring meeting in Arlington, Virginia. And as soon as the panel discussion started, somebody literally at the back of the room stood up, pointed right at me, and asked me a very pointed question. He said, "What is the #1 challenge of fire service leadership today?" And I honestly looked around, I looked to my right, I looked to my left at the other panelists, and I don't know if he was trying to call me out or he was trying to catch me off guard or embarrass me, but I kind of chuckled for a second and I said, that's easy. Getting to know your people. The greatest challenge of fire service leadership today is simply getting to know our people. Because until we truly get to know our people, we won't know what makes them tick. We won't know what their goals are. We won't know what their needs are, their wants, what obstacles or challenges they face in volunteering to the level that they want to volunteer to. Too many times we get wrapped up in or only focused on, you're not meeting our expectations. But do we ever think about the fact that maybe whatever their situation is, whatever challenges or obstacles they're facing in volunteering is actually not even meeting their expectations? And we need to look for opportunities to help them with that, or simply be aware of it, support it, and help build that rope bridge to the other side to make sure that whatever contributions they're continuing to give, we can sustain them in hopes of growing them. I teach a whole other class, and some of the folks that are on the conversation today have been a part of it, titled From the Xbox to the Box Alarm, Connecting Today's Firefighters. And I tell them, if you take absolutely nothing away from that conversation, remember this one thing, especially about today's generation, is that the greatest expectation of today's generation is to be given clear expectations. The greatest expectation of this generation is to be given clear expectations. Well, what does that mean? Well, first and foremost, because I told you so doesn't cut it anymore. And just the fact that I told you isn't good enough either. They want to see it in a job description. They want to see a training path. They want to see a learning path. They want to see an education path. And what scares some of us in positions of authority, they also want to see that path to advancement that we see at the top of that retention cliff, right? But the greatest expectation is that they want clear expectations. And the reality is, it's not good enough just to tell them, and it's not good enough just to tell them once, but they need positive and frequent reinforcement with that. That's really what it comes down to. And I thought this was a novel idea. It's based on an article I wrote in 2007 of the same title. I will tell you that that conversation is not only more popular, but more relevant today than ever before. And while I thought it was a breakthrough moment that I had several years ago, it turns out some other guy had already come up with the idea. He just phrased it differently. And if you may recognize that photo of the gentleman standing next to me, who I had the honor of sitting on a panel discussion with back in 2009, Chief Alan Brunacini, God rest his soul, one of the fathers of the modern fire service, who wrote, "Firefighters want 5 things. Tell me what you want me to do, train me how to do it, give me the tools, stay the heck out of my way, tell me how I did," right? I just kind of encapsulated that in the greatest expectation of this generation is to be given clear expectations. But what's another key phrase that Chief Brunacini left us with that really encapsulates everything we've been discussing tonight? How to avoid conflict, how to build that rope bridge to the other side, how to make our volunteer system sustainable, stable, and growing. 2 words that Chief Brunacini always left us with that we can never forget and we need to remember every day. Be nice. It's those 2 words that will sustain us, will sustain the fire service in general, especially the volunteer fire service, but really hits home because this is what when we talk about establishing a baseline for human relations in our firehouse and our fire service, it comes down to his 2 words, simply be nice. We do absolutely nothing else. We will be ahead of the game and we'll be able to stay ahead of the game if we simply be nice to people. That's the one thing that we need to remember. And when we're not nice to people, that's a weapon of membership destruction. And when you're doing exit interviews or stay conversations, that's going to come up repeatedly depending on the culture and the environment that you've created or allowed to be maintained in your firehouse. Simply be nice is the solution, or at least the start of the solution to everything. I collect definitions of brotherhood from a lot of other people. I have several of my own, but this is my baseline of human relations. We don't need to like each other necessarily, but brotherhood says that we are obligated to love each other, if only just a little bit. And when we step away from that, when we get on the other side of that, and we neither like nor love our brother or sister or fellow firefighters, we have no business being in the fire service. My good friend Frank Viscuso wrote in his book, Step Up and Lead, and just shared online again the other day, that if you can't be happy for someone else's success, you don't deserve success yourself. That's his way of saying we don't need to necessarily like each other, but we are obligated to love each other, if only just a little bit. Now let's transition from the individual to individual and talk about the organization for a second. If your decision-making tree as individuals and especially as the organization don't start and end with what's right for the customer, there's a real good chance we are not making the right decisions. So much of the decisions that I see made in volunteer fire departments every single day say it's about us. Instead, it's not about us. It's about, first and foremost, those we serve with, but just as importantly, because we can't get there or be there without them, it's about the people who allow us to serve. Our predecessors, our existing officers and our leadership, and most importantly, our families and the people who support us and allow us to serve. So it really comes down to this. The organization that focuses solely on whether individuals are meeting the needs of the organization, but fails to address whether the organization is meeting the needs of its members, frankly, is destined for failure or worse. So here's the bottom line. Here's how we build that rope bridge to the other side. Here's how we avoid those weapons of membership destruction. Here's how we avoid the perils of the retention cliff. We need to give as much attention to the with people part that we have been giving to the for people part of serving our communities. Because without the with people part, nothing else matters. If we're not focused on recruitment and retention, absolutely nothing else matters. Everything else are just the widgets of the fire service. So we have to ask ourselves, is it game over? I don't think so. Is it that's all, folks? I don't think so, and I hope so. And I hope, because simply demonstrated by your participation in this conversation tonight, and trust me, you're going to get your chance to talk and share in just a second here, it's not game over. And I would actually, if I had a chance to change this this board in front of this church, how I would rephrase this is not tweet others as you would like to be tweeted, aka not don't treat others as you would like to be treated. Treat others as they would like to be treated. My tolerance for pain, my tolerance for mistreatment, my tolerance for disrespect may be much different, could be higher, could be lower than other people. So don't base it on me. Treat others as they would like to be treated. But you know how you're the only way that you're going to know how they want to be treated? You need to get to know them. If you are in either a formal or an informal leadership position in your department, you simply need to get to know your people. That's how we're going to get back to the brotherhood, the sisterhood, the firehood, the second family concept that many of us that are in this conversation were raised on, remember, cherish, cling to, and hope for the future of our fire service. Because at the end of the day, we all have choices to make. We can either let our fire service slip away, waste it away, or we can share it willingly, freely, openly, and with a sense of urgency. Hopefully you can figure out by my passion and my attitude for the fire service what decision I have made, and that is to give it away, and give it away now, give it away with a sense of urgency, and seek every single opportunity to train my replacement. The outcomes will largely be determined by our outlook. We view our next challenge simply as an obstacle, as an obligation because some jamoke from Buffalo told me I had to because I had to watch this webinar? Or do we see it as an opportunity for positive change in ourselves and others in our organization? If you can control your outlook, most often we can control the outcomes. And here's my bottom line to that. Change or don't, I don't really care. But change or don't, be surprised by the outcomes. So I mentioned earlier, I'm going to have some bonus content for you at the end. If you connect with me or working with the Fire Chiefs Association, we'll connect you with these documents and some other things that I discussed. But we've come to the end of the part where I get to share my retention cliff theory and also some of the possible solutions. Here's my information. My homework assignments for you are this. First and foremost, please take the opportunity in writing or other means to thank the Montana State Fire Chiefs Association for bringing me to you and bringing you into this conversation and all the other great resources that they provide, not only for their state organization and their state fire departments, but for all of us across the country. Thank them for that. Continue this conversation. Connect with me and make the commitment to volunteer enlistment. Make the commitment to recruitment and retention. Make the commitment to investing as much time and energy in the with people part of what we do as we've invested in the for people part as well. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we will take questions, and it's your opportunity to chat.
You know, Tiger, I'll jump in here just to say thanks on behalf of everybody that joined on tonight. On behalf of the State Chiefs Association, I put in the chat there. If you got some questions, put them in the chat, or I think there's a raise your hand option there on the screen that will try and get to some folks. But, as you went through some of that stuff, I can't speak for everybody else, but, I'm coming up on almost 30 years in this business, and we still learn something from each other, right? Every time we listen to presentations. Your definition of brotherhood. Boy, if folks didn't write that down, you probably should have. That should probably be posted on the walls of every one of our fire stations around. Taking care of each other. It's simply that easy when we stop to think about the processes and how we interact with our people. It goes right back to Bruno, be nice, right? Take care of each other.
Yeah.
Anti-retentionism. Learned a new phrase tonight. Again, but how powerful is that you sit there and go through that are we practicing anti-retentionism?
Right.
And to your intro, if we spend a lot more time in some of our retention, means we get to spend a little less time in our recruitment. And we probably should still think about changing the order of that phrase. And I know you and I probably had that conversation many times.
Yeah.
Really should be retention and then recruitment.
Yep.
And then peace at the home, peace at the firehouse.
Right.
Well, how true, I always like to say we're all a dysfunction, or we're all a family, dysfunctional at best, but nonetheless,
That's
at
right.
least we have function within the systems.
That's
But
right.
those are my takeaways. Does anybody else have anything else out there that they want to talk about? Looks like a quiet bunch.
And Rich, one comment to that. I love that you brought up that we are a family, a dysfunctional one. But the good news is there's fun in dysfunctional.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely the case.
We can even have fun in dysfunctional. So yeah.
Yep.
Any questions, comments, thoughts?
I think, Tiger, I would have expected nothing less than you to cover it. At first, I didn't see it, so I didn't see the raise hand option available, but you did cover it eventually. Conversations that we have with our members, many times today lead to legal problems because we don't know how to talk to individuals, and we don't understand that the way we watch people talk to people 35 years ago as we entered the service and we were talked to is not acceptable today.
Right.
And unfortunately, it's kind of hard to discipline people because unfortunately our leadership today, a lot of it lacks appropriate training. And they have only done what I call management by wandering, because all they've done is wander around and see everything that was done, recognize it as being okay, and they do it themselves. And that creates a dilemma for us. But I can tell you in many of the stations, as I travel this country, all I hear is we're bringing in a bunch of turds today. And all I have to say is, if you're bringing in a bunch of turds today, instead of sitting around complaining about your turds, I suggest you take those turds and make them the best turds you can make them, because that's what's coming through the door today. And if you can't work with that, then you're going to have bigger problems, because the caliber of individuals aren't coming in today as they were back in the day because of whatever reasons. The motivation's not there, the education's not there. But if we don't take the initiative to make them better, then we're part of the problem as well.
Yeah. I was kind of chuckling at some of the things you were saying that I use it in my Xbox class that so many of us are stuck on the discipline paradigm. Beatings will continue until morale improves, right? That has never been an effective, leadership model by any stretch. But so many of, I would never say older. I always say more seasoned firefighters, right? Unfortunately, still carry that, and they continue to punish new firefighters because if I had to live with it, if I had to put up with it, then you should have to go through that as well. And they're losing sight of the fact that they have what I call finely tuned BS filters, right? It's called the Google machine, right? In the palm of their hand, that they can fact check anything that comes out of your mouth before you can finish saying it, right? And they simply don't accept change. And, I shared kind of an expanded conversation off of this is a class that I offer, and it's titled, Are You Ready for Your New Recruit? And it's a retention first before recruitment approach, but One of the things that I talk about in there is your change is the C word of the fire service, right? What's another famous Bruno-ism? Firefighters only dislike two things: change and the way things are right now, right? So, and it's honestly, it's been either a cursing or a blessing or a curse to me. Throughout my life, throughout my career, I've always been a change agent. And I'm not talking change for the sake of change. I'm talking real positive change in myself and others and the organizations that I have the opportunity to interface with and impact as well. And I hope I'm not alone in that. And those are the kinds of people that I gravitate to. And, you kind of talked about the quality issue, because we obviously have quantity issues in our recruitment efforts. And there are some quality issues. But I will tell you, as somebody who, my first year of retirement, my definition of retirement is I was tired yesterday and I'm tired again today. I'm retired. I got to spend time in 38 different firehouses around the country, right? And I'm here from the future to tell you that there are exceptions to the rule about their generation out there. Is it challenging to find them? Absolutely. But when you do, I encourage you to do this, and that is have the wherewithal and the willingness to let go and arm them with all the tools, resources, and support that they need to go out and find you more exceptions to the rule about their generation, because they are out there. I get to interact with them, I get to mentor them, and I get to watch them succeed every single day. And I'll kind of follow that up with a common statement that I make, and it's a rhetorical question. Do you know what kind of people are attracted to high values, high standards, high performing organizations? High values, high standards, high performing people. But if your organization is not that yet, you need to get it there. And that's kind of what my Are You Ready for Your Next Recruit class is about. It's really based on the premise that, what do you say we get our own house in order before we invite somebody else into it? And that's a real struggle. And I have sympathy, but not empathy for the fire chief or commissioner or whoever it may be, who says, well, if I had more people, I could free somebody up to focus on recruitment and retention. Completely losing sight of the fact that if we focused on recruitment and retention all the time, what's a potential outcome? We could possibly end up with all the people we need to do all the jobs that need to get done. It's no small task. It's a very complex challenge, but last I checked, we as firefighters are problem solvers by trade. We're wired for that. But again, we need to focus with the same attitude, the passion, and the emphasis on the with people part as we've invested on the serving and the for people part. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody.
Hey, Tiger, there's a question in the chats there. What does your interview process look like? And is it set as an SOP?
It is, and it's something, it's an actually kind of a process and system that I developed for my department years ago. And it's, it's a great question because it's something I'm very focused on today. It's application and then interview with a membership committee, and then they make a recommendation to our board of directors, and then they make a recommendation to our membership. And we're still a membership corporation, so we vote people in. And we, unlike a lot of departments that I work with, where they do that after their first year, and they're after their first year and the completion of the probationary period, we do it at the outset. But one of my challenges with that process is that we as members, unless we've had an interaction with that individual or know them previously, are voting blind. And I tell the story, I am living proof that you can teach a monkey to pull a bail back on a nozzle and get water out of it. Half joking, right? But only half. Can you teach everybody to be a respected, respectful, loyal, trusting, trustworthy, contributing member of our fire service family? Not necessarily, right? That's a totally different value set. It's a different skill set. But if they come with that skill set, that value set, teaching them to pull a bail back on a nozzle or absolutely any other tactic that we need to teach them in the fire service certainly gets a lot easier, right? If they come with that, we can teach them everything. But if they don't come with that core value set, I don't know that we can teach them anything, right? So what I'm very focused on is looking at your onboarding process, looking at all, and it's a process that we go through when we come in and do a strategic interview with a department, where we look at the entire volunteer life cycle from the moment of inquiry to acceptance through the onboarding to them becoming a contributing member and whatever exit fire from the fire department looks like by whoever's choice that may be, right? But looking at every document, every step, every process, every interaction, every touch point, what is the timing in between each of those steps, and where are people falling through the gaps? And most importantly, making sure that there are enough interactions with that individual before they ever raise their right hand to figure out whether or not they're the right fit for our fire service family. And I'm not talking about being exclusive by any stretch, but this isn't for everyone. And we need to make sure that they're coming with the right attitudes towards us and also towards the people we serve, right? And they're doing it for the right reasons. They're being realistic about it, and they're clear in their expectations, and we're clear in our expectations to them. And the example I use is if you give them, say, 4 to 6 informal opportunities to interact either in a social setting, a training setting, or maybe a ride along or something that looks like that before they ever raise their right hand. And they only do one or two of those, but we expected 6 or 8 opportunities that we gave them. What should ever make us think that they're going to actually be able to meet the quantitative expectations of participation once they actually do raise their right hand, right? Because the bottom line, and I don't care, my department, like many others, has, a 1-year probation, and theoretically we can discharge them after that without cause and so on and so forth. But once they raise their right hand and we accept them, we own them. Nobody wins when we have to discharge them, right? Successful recruitment comes down to 2 parts. Leading in the right people, but just as importantly, weeding out the wrong people and helping them understand whether our volunteering opportunity is right for them and right for us as early in the process is doing them a service and it's doing us a service. And if we don't take the time and energy to get to know them before they raise their right hand, that's doing a disservice to everyone. And that's exactly how we end up with the revolving doors of bringing people in, pushing them off the retention cliff, never to be seen again. And the body count at the bottom of that cliff is just staggering. Hopefully that was a long way around to answer a relatively quick question. But if you can't tell, I'm pretty passionate about processes and making sure that we're bringing the right people into our organizations.
So Tiger, I'm getting the nod from our true facilitator behind the scenes that we probably get to wrap this up a little bit. I just want to get out to folks to understand that a lot of the folks that we're able to bring to these webinars, like Tiger, John Buckman we've had in the past, and some of these other folks, the really neat thing about them is once you get to know them, they're just like you and I, and they're willing to share all of this information to us to make our systems better and to help us through some of the struggles that we might be going through, because they've been there, they've done it, sometimes wrong, and they've got the road rash sometimes to help prove it. So what I'm trying to get with that long story short is you got Tiger's information there, and a little secret about Tiger is he actually works fairly cheap. You buy him some ice cream and he's all over the situation.
Yeah. Look over my shoulder. Yeah.
You keep feeding it to him, and man, you got him forever. So just keep that in mind. We hope that we can get him back out in person again one of these days to one of our conferences to where you can interact with him one-on-one. But don't hesitate to reach out to Tiger or any of the folks that we typically bring you. When they mean it when they say it. Their contact information's there, reach out and you'll have those connections throughout the rest of your career. And we really appreciate you taking your time to be here with us, Tiger, tonight. And everybody else's time to be here with us as well. You've got a quality hour and a half worth of training out of this situation. And it's recorded. It'll be back on the website. And as always, if you've got any suggestions, sure shoot them to myself as president of the state chiefs or to Michael or through our staff. And topics that you want to hear or see, man, we'll do everything we can to get it on here to you. And Tiger, top-notch job. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you, Michael. Thank you, Kim. Thank you to the association. But most importantly, thank you for taking time out of your evening to spend with me. I don't take that lightly. It's the greatest honor I could ever receive. And thank you for being a part of this conversation. Go forth and turn this conversation into action in your own volunteer fire departments. One of the things I do want to mention, a couple of folks still have outstanding questions. John Alegria, how do you feel about different forms of membership? Reach out to me on Facebook. Reach out to me via email. My cell phone is always on. You want to reach out to me, jump on a Google Meet or a Zoom call after this. My time is yours. So thank you for the time that you've given me tonight.
Take care, everybody, and stay safe.
Thank
Till
you,
the next.
Chief.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Chief.
You're very welcome. Thanks for the
Talk to you later,
opportunity.
Tiger.
All righty. Hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
You bet, buddy.